Let's start with Space Force. I think you should set it up.
So this is a 10-part comedy series written by, co-written by, and starring Steve Carell. He's reunited with Greg Daniels, who co-created The American Office, made that into a thing, and it is basically taking Donald Trump's idea of an air force for space and using that as the stepping stone. Boots on the moon by whenever. Using that as a stepping stone to start a 10-part comedy. So here, Steve Carell stars as General Mark Naird. He's a sort of a proper naval man who is put in charge, much to his displeasure, to become the chief of Space Force. He works alongside Dr. Adrian Mallory. He's sort of a scientist who he has to report to. That's John Malkovich. It's sort of a madcap comedy, really.
And the late Fred Willard plays his dad. Yes. Lisa Kudrow plays his wife, who we see initially, and then when we see her again, she's in prison, and we're not quite sure why.
I found it quite impenetrable because I don't feel like Space Force, like a lot of things Trump's done over the time he's been president, has had a lot of coverage over here. So I wasn't 100% sure even what it was going in. I sort of knew the idea that they wanted another arm of the United States military, but I think it relied on you knowing what Space Force was all about, which I didn't. This is one of those rare shows where, because of the talent both in front of and behind the camera, you hope and assume it's going to be better than it is. But nothing about it grabbed me. In fact, I think of all the shows we watched this week, this was the slowest. And it should have been the easiest to watch because it was supposed to be a comedy.
But it was long. It was 36 minutes.
I know, but that shouldn't feel long.
I think we found it, as you say, established comic talent in front and behind the camera, but there's a lot of them doing these weird spacey things at the moment. Anucci and McFarlane and now Carell and Greg Daniels, and it's something that none of them have got right, and I'm not quite sure why. Here, the jokes are very, very base. I mean, they've got this character, the Russian character everyone distrusts, who's dating his daughter. You've got the wisecracking social media guy who he locks away. You know, there's some very old-fashioned racial stereotypes in this, and it does, despite the subject matter, it does feel very old-fashioned in its characterization. Carell's character, General Ned, is very much the put-upon sitcom dad in a way. And at the end of the day, and I'm paraphrasing from another review I saw, it's just not funny enough. It's just not funny at all. That was
the thing. Carell doesn't have to try very hard to be likeable. I instantly like him, really, in anything he's in, because he's just very affable, very warm. Even as Michael Scott all those years ago, even when he was being an utter buffoon and you were cringing, you still liked him, and it's the same here, except you don't feel the same connection to any of the world around him. It's not funny in the slightest, and maybe we are doing that thing where you just watch one episode of a comedy, because we're always saying comedy needs time to breathe, but I just got to the end of it and I was like, I don't have time in my mind for another 9 episodes of this.
I think the best thing was the Fred Willard stuff and him being, you know, a little bit senile, and Carell ignoring his parents in favour of the Space Force, but that was a very minor subplot.
Yeah, and also I think, like you say, at the end of the day, all the reviews have said the same. It's just not funny enough. This could have been sort of a Naked Gun type takeoff of these people in 20-minute chunks, and I would have found it perhaps more endearing. The 36 minutes felt like a real slog. That shouldn't be the case when you're watching a Greg Daniels, Steve Carell collaboration.
That just reminded me of a comedy in inverted commas version of that Sean Penn one, which was equally impenetrable.
God, the first. Yeah. Was really... Perhaps space just does not work in any form.
Well, Red Dwarf got it the best, I think, in the 90s. And I feel maybe that's because they were in space and they capitalized on that isolation, and I think a lot of the jokes were around what do you do when you're in space and nobody else is there. This is the nuts and bolts of planning it as well. It's the technical stuff. It's the really boring side of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I just did not like it. And you know me, I'm very open-minded, but I just didn't. You're right, Matt.
Yeah.
I just did not
I
like
think
this. And
those opening couple of scenes were promising when you had his promotion to general, and then that scene around the table with, oh, I like all these people. Oh, they're not in the rest of the episode.
But also, don't you find when things aren't good, you then start to go, oh, that's Lisa Kudrow. Oh, that's no. You're not invested in who they actually are.
No, couldn't
You
name
just
any of the characters if I didn't have the
no,
Wikipedia in front of me.
no. So, try that. Space Force, all available now in its entirety on Netflix. No news yet on whether they've got a second season. They normally announce that pretty quickly on Netflix, but the reviews have been very similar to ours across the board, I would say.